Henry III, called the Black or the Pious, was a member of the Salian dynasty of Holy Roman Emperors. He was the eldest son of Conrad II of Germany and Gisela of Swabia. His father made him Duke of Bavaria in 1026, after the death of Duke Henry V. On Easter Day 1028, after his father was crowned Holy Roman Emperor, Henry was elected and crowned King of Germany in the Cathedral of Aachen by Pilgrim, Archbishop of Cologne. After the death of Hermann IV, Duke of Swabia in 1038, his father gave him that duchy, as well as the Kingdom of Burgundy, which Conrad had inherited in 1033. Upon the death of his father on 4 June 1039, he became sole ruler of the kingdom and was crowned emperor by Pope Clement II in Rome. Early life and reign. Henry's first tutor was Bruno, Bishop of Augsburg. On Bruno's death in 1029, Gilbert, Bishop of Freising, was appointed to take his place. In 1033, at the age of 16, Henry came of age and Gilbert was compensated for his services. In 1035 Adalbero, Duke of Carinthia, was deposed by Conrad, but Gilbert convinced Henry to refuse this injustice, and the princes of Germany, having legally elected Henry, would not recognize the deposition unless their king did also. Henry, in accordance with his promise to Gilbert, did not consent to his father's act, and Conrad, stupefied, fell unconscious after many attempts to turn Henry. Upon recovering, Conrad knelt before his son and exacted the desired consent. Gilbert was penalized dearly by the emperor. In 1036, Henry was married to Gunhilda of Denmark, a daughter of Canute the Great, King of Denmark, England, and Norway, by his wife Emma of Normandy. Early on, Henry's father had arranged with Canute to have him rule over some parts of northern Germany and in turn to have their children married. The marriage took place in Nijmegen at the earliest legal age. In 1038, Henry was called to aid his father in Italy, and Gunhilda died on the Adriatic coast during the return trip. In 1039, his father also died, and Henry became sole ruler and imperator in Spe. After Conrad's death, Henry spent his first year in power on a tour of his domains. He visited the Low Countries to receive the homage of Gothelo I, Duke of Upper and Lower Lorraine. In Cologne, he was joined by Hermann II, Archbishop of Cologne, who accompanied him and his mother to Saxony, where he was to build the town of Goslar up from obscurity to stately imperial grandeur. He had an armed force when he entered Thuringia to meet with Eckhard II, Margrave of Meissen, whose advice and counsel he desired on the recent successes of Duke Bretislaus I of Bohemia in Poland. Only a Bohemian embassy bearing hostages appeased Henry, and he disbanded his army and continued his tour. He passed through Bavaria, where, upon his departure, King Peter Urziola of Hungary sent raiding parties into Swabia. There, at Ulm, he convened a council of princes at which he received his first recognition from Italy. He returned to Ingelheim and was recognized by a Burgundian embassy and Aribert, Archbishop of Milan, whom he had supported against his father. This peace with Aribert healed the only open wound in the empire. Meanwhile, in 1039, while he was touring his dominions, Conrad, Adalbero's successor in Carinthia and Henry's cousin, died childless. Henry, being his nearest kin, automatically inherited that duchy as well. He was now a triple duke and triple king. Subjecting Bohemia. Henry's first military campaign as sole ruler was in 1040 in Bohemia, where Bretislaus was still a threat, especially via raids by his Hungarian ally. At Stablo, after attending to the reform of some monasteries, Henry summoned his army. In July, he met with Eckhard at Goslar and joined together his whole force at Regensburg. He set out on the 13th of August, but he was ambushed and the expedition ended in disaster. Only by releasing many Bohemian hostages, including Bretislaus's son, did the Germans procure the release of many of their comrades and the establishment of a peace. Henry retreated hastily and with little fanfare, preferring to ignore his first great defeat. On his return to Germany, he appointed Suage Bishop of Bamberg, who would later be Pope Clement II. First Hungarian campaign in 1040, Peter of Hungary was overthrown by Samuel Aber and fled to Germany, where Henry received him well despite the enmity formerly between him. Bretislaus was thus deprived of an ally, and Henry renewed preparations for a campaign in Bohemia. On the 15th of August, he and Eckhard set out once more, almost exactly a year after his last expedition. This time he was victorious, and Bretislaus signed a peace treaty at Regensburg. Henry spent Christmas 1041 at Strasbourg, where he received emissaries from Burgundy. He travelled there in the new year and dispensed justice as needed. On his return, he heard, at Basel, of the raids into Bavaria by the King of Hungary. He thus granted his own Duchy of Bavaria to one Henry, a relative of the last independent duke. At Cologne, he called together all his great princes, including Eckhard, and they unanimously declared war on Hungary. It wasn't until September 1042 that he set out, after having dispatched men to seek out Agnes de Poitou to be his new bride. The expedition into Hungary successfully subdued the west of that nation, but Aber fled to eastern fortresses, and Henry's installed candidate, an unknown cousin of his, was quickly removed when the emperor turned his back. After Christmas at Goslar, his intended capital, he entertained several embassies. Bretislaus came in person. A Kievan embassy was rejected because Henry was not seeking a Rus bride, and the ambassadors of Casimir I of Poland were likewise rejected because the Duke came not in person. Gisela, Henry's mother, died at this juncture, and Henry went to the French borders, probably near Ivoire, to meet King Henry I of France, probably over his impending marriage to the Princess of Aquitaine. Henry next turned to Hungary again, where he forced Aber to recognize the Danubian territory donated to Germany by Stephen I of Hungary pro causa amicitiae. These territories were ceded to Hungary after the defeat of Conrad II in 1030. This border remained the border between Hungary and Austria until 1920. After this victory, Henry, a pious man who dreamed of the peace and truce of God being respected over all his realms, declared from the pulpit in Constance in October 1043 a general indulgence or pardon, whereby he promised to forgive all injuries to himself and to forego vengeance. He encouraged all his vassals to do likewise. This is known as the Day of Indulgence, or Day of Pardon. After marriage, Henry was remarried at Ingelheim in 1043 to Agnes, daughter of Duke William V of Aquitaine and Agnes of Burgundy. Agnes was then living at the court of her stepfather, Geoffrey Martel, Count of Anjou. This connection to the obstreperous vassal of the French king, as well as her consanguinity, she and Henry being both descended from Henry the Fowler, caused some churchmen to oppose their union. But the marriage went as planned. Agnes was crowned at Mainz, division of Lorraine, after the coronation and the wedding. Henry wintered at Utrecht, where he proclaimed the same indulgence he had the year prior in Burgundy. Then, in April 1044, Gothelo I, Duke of Lorraine, died. Henry did not wish to solidify the ducal power in any duchy, so instead of appointing Godfrey, Gothelo's eldest son and already acting duke in Upper Lorraine, as duke in the Lower Duchy, he appointed Gothelo II, Godfrey's younger brother, thus raising the ire of the eldest son. Henry claimed that Gothelo's dying wish was to see the duchy split between the brothers, but Godfrey, having faithfully served Henry thus far, rebelled. Henry called the two brothers together at Nijmegen but failed to reconcile them. Nevertheless, he set out on the war path against Hungary, which was experiencing internal duress. Second Hungarian campaign. Henry entered Hungary on the 6th of July and met a large army with his small host. Disaffection rent the Magyar forces, however, and they crumbled at the German onslaught in the Battle of Emiacut Nfo. Peter was reinstalled as king at Székesfehérvár, a vassal of the empire, and Henry could return home triumphant. The Hungarian people having readily submitted to his rule, tribute was to be paid, and Aba was captured by Peter while fleeing and beheaded. Hungary appeared to have entered the German fold fully and with ease. Unrest in Lorraine. Upon his return from the Hungarian expedition, Godfrey of Lorraine began seeking out allies, among them Henry of France, to support him in any possible act of overt insurrection. Seeing this, the emperor summoned Henry to Aachen for a trial by his peers of Lower Lorraine. He was condemned, and his duchy and county of Verden were seized. He immediately fled the scene and began arming for revolt. Henry wintered at Speyer, with civil war clearly in view on the horizon. In early 1045, Henry entered Lorraine with a local army and besieged and took Godfrey's castle of Bockelheim. He took a few other castles as well, but famine drove him out, leaving behind enough men to guard the countryside against Godfrey's raids. He turned to Burgundy. Godfrey had done his best to foment rebellion there by creating conflicts between the imperialist faction, which supported union with the empire, and the nationalist faction, which supported an independent Burgundy. However, Louis, Count of Montbelliard, defeated Reginald I, Count of Burgundy, and when Henry arrived, the latter was ready with Gerald, Count of Geneva, to do homage. Burgundy was thereafter happily united to Henry's crown. Height of power. Henry then discussed the Italian political scene with some Lombard magnates at Augsburg and went on to Goslar, where he gave the Duchy of Swabia to Otto, Count Palatine of Lorraine. Henry also gave the Margrave of Antwerp to Baldwin, the son of Baldwin V of Flanders. On his way to Hungary to spend Pentecost with King Peter, a floor collapsed in one of his halls and Bruno, Bishop of Würzburg, was killed. In Hungary, Peter gave over the Golden Lance, symbol of sovereignty in Hungary, to Henry and pledged an oath of fealty along with his nobles. Hungary was now pledged to Peter for life and peace was fully restored between the two kingdoms of Germany and Hungary. In July, even Godfrey submitted and was imprisoned in Giebichenstein, the German tower. War in Lorraine. Henry fell ill at Triber in October, and Henry of Bavaria and Otto of Swabia chose as his successor Otto's nephew and successor in the Palatinate, Henry I. Henry III recovered, but remained heirless. At the beginning of 1046, now at the height of his power, but having divested himself of two of the great stem duchies, Henry's old advisor, Eckhard of Meissen, died, leaving Meissen to Henry. Henry bestowed it on William, Count of Orlamunda. Henry then moved to Lower Lorraine, where Gothelo II had just died and Dirk Ivy of Holland had seized Flushing. Henry personally led a river campaign against Count Dirk. Both Count and Flushing fell to him. He gave the latter to Bernald, Bishop of Utrecht, and returned to Aachen to celebrate Pentecost and to decide on the fate of Lorraine. Henry pitied and restored Godfrey, but he gave the county of Verden to the bishop of the city. This did not conciliate the Duke. Henry gave the Lower Duchy to Frederick. He then appointed Adalbert Archbishop of Bremen and summoned Wiger, Archbishop of Ravenna, to a trial. The right of a German court to try an Italian bishop was very controversial and presaged the investiture controversy that characterized the reigns of Henry's son and grandson. Henry continued from there on to Saxony and held imperial courts at Quedlinburg, Mersburg, and Meissen. At the first, he made his daughter Beatrice from his first marriage abbess, and at the second he ended the strife between the Dukes Pomerania-Orange and Casimir of Poland. This is one of the earliest, or perhaps the earliest, recording of the name of Pomerania, whose Duke, Zemuzel, brought gifts. Second trip to Italy. After these events in northern Germany and a brief visit to Augsburg, he summoned the greatest magnates of the realm, clerical and lay, to meet and accompany him as he crossed the Brenner Pass into Italy, one of the most important of his many travels. His old ally, Aribert of Milan, had recently died, and the Milanese had chosen as candidate for his successor one Guido. in opposition to the candidates supported by the nobles. Meanwhile, in Rome, three popes, Benedict IX, Sylvester III, and Gregory VI, contested the pontifical honors. Benedict was a Tusculan who had previously renounced the throne, Sylvester was a Crescentian, and Gregory was a reformer but a Simoniac. Henry marched first to Verona, thence to Pavia in October. He held a court and dispensed justice as he had in Burgundy years earlier. He moved on to Sutri and held a second court on the 20th of December where he deposed all the candidates for the St. Peter's throne and left it temporarily vacant. He headed towards Rome and held a synod wherein he declared no Roman priest fit. Adalbert of Bremen refused the honor and Henry appointed Suiger of Bamberg, who was acclaimed duly by the people and clergy, we are told. He took the name Clement II. Imperial coronation on Christmas Day 1046, Clement was consecrated, and Henry and Agnes were crowned Holy Roman Emperor and Empress. The populace gave Henry the golden chain of the patriciate and made him patricius, giving the powers, seemingly, of the Crescenti family during the 10th century to nominate popes. Henry's first acts were to visit Frascati, capital of the Counts of Tusculum, and to seize all the castles of the Crescenti. He and the Pope then moved south where his father had created the situation as it was then in his visit of 1038. Henry reversed many of Conrad's acts. At Capua, he was received by Prince Guaimar IV of Salerno, also Prince of Capua since 1038. However, Henry gave Capua back to the twice-deprived Prince Pandolf IV, a highly unpopular choice. Guaimar had been acclaimed as Duke of Apulia and Calabria by the Norman mercenaries under William Iron-Arm and his brother Drogo of Hauteville. In return, Guaimar had recognized the conquest of the Normans and invested William as his vassal with the comital title. Henry made Drogo, William's successor in Apulia, a direct vassal of the imperial crown. He did likewise to Ranulf Drengot, the Count of Aversa, who had been a vassal of Guaimar as Prince of Capua. Thus, Guaimar was deprived of his greatest vassals, his principality split in two, and his greatest enemy reinstated. Henry lost popularity amongst the Lombards with these decisions, and Benevento, though a papal vassal, would not admit him. He authorized Drogo to conquer it and headed north to reunion with Agnes at Ravenna. He arrived at Verona in May, and the Italian circuit was completed. Henry's appointments. Upon his return to Germany, Henry filled many offices that had fallen vacant. First, he gave away his last personal duchy, making Welf Duke of Carinthia. He made his Italian chancellor, Humphrey, Archbishop of Ravenna. He filled several other sees, installing Guido in Piacenza, his chaplain Theodoric in Verdun, the provost Hermann of Speyer in Strasbourg, and his German chancellor Theodoric in Constance. The important Lorraine bishoprics of Metz and Trier received respectively Adalberon and Eberhard, a chaplain. The many vacancies of the imperial episcopate now filled. Henry was at Metz in July 1047 when a stewing rebellion broke out seriously. Godfrey was now allied with Baldwin of Flanders, his son, Dirk of Holland, and Hermann, Count of Mons. Henry gathered an army and went north, where he gave Adalbert of Bremen lands once Godfrey's and oversaw the trial by combat of Thietmar, the brother of Bernard II, Duke of Saxony, accused of plotting to kill the king. Bernard, an enemy of Adalbert, was now clearly on Henry's bad side. Henry made peace with the new king of Hungary, Andrew I, and moved his campaign into the Netherlands. At Flushing, he was defeated by Dirk. The Hollanders sacked Charlemagne's palace at Nijmegen and burnt Verdun. Godfrey then made public penance and assisted in rebuilding Verdun. The rebels besieged Liege, defended stoutly by Bishop Wauzo. Henry slowed his campaigning after the death of Henry of Bavaria and gave Upper Lorraine to one Adalbert and left. The Pope had died in the meantime and Henry chose Poppo of Brixen, who took the name Damasus II. Henry gave Bavaria to one Cuno and, at Ulm in January 1048, Swabia to Otto of Schweinfurt, called the White. Henry met Henry of France, probably at Ivoire again, in October, and at Christmas, envoys from Rome came to seek a new pope, Damasus having died. Henry's final appointment of this long spate was a successor to Adalbert in Lorraine. For this, he appointed Gerard of Châtenois, a relative of Adalbert and Henry himself. Peace in Lorraine. The year of 1049 was a series of successes. Dirk of Holland was defeated and killed. Adalbert of Bremen managed a peace with Bernard of Saxony and negotiated a treaty with the missionary monarch Sweyn II of Denmark, with the assistance of Sweyn and Edward the Confessor of England, whose enemies Baldwin had harboured. Baldwin of Flanders was harassed by sea and unable to escape the onslaught of the imperial army. At Cologne, the Pope excommunicated Godfrey, in revolt again, and Baldwin, the former, abandoned his allies and was imprisoned by the emperor yet again. Baldwin too gave in under the pressure of Henry's ravages. Finally, war had ceased in the Low Countries and the Lorraines, and peace seemed to have taken hold.